Massachusetts. Christmas is a time of traditions, and over the years, NPR has created a few traditions of its own. During this next hour, some of NPR's best storytellers will share holiday tales that have become listener favorites, including some that you might not have heard in a while. They touch on the range of emotions all of us experience at this time of year, from wistfulness to joy, from doubt to hope. I'm Lynn Neary, and this is Tinsel Tales, stories of the Christmas season from NPR. For the child in many of us, the image of Christmas morning centers on that one perfect gift waiting under the tree. On one particular Christmas several years ago, All Things Considered commentator Lee Stringer felt prepared to settle for something less than perfection.
I couldn't help feeling a certain eagerness when I woke up Christmas Day, 1985, even though I was living under a staircase on the lower level of Grand Central Terminal in New York. Nothing like the holidays to bring out the little child inside. I had heard rumors that random acts of kindness had run rampant amongst last year's holiday travelers. So heck, I figured I wasn't so down on my luck that I couldn't give luck a fair chance. But when I stirred, I noticed my shoes were gone. Someone not content to wait on the hand of Providence had made a gift of them to himself, I supposed. I was hungry. I shook the sleep out of me and slap-footed my way upstairs. The concrete floors were cold, but not so rude as they might have been had my socks been stolen, too. It was early yet. The main floor was eerily deserted. There were two huge wreaths above the departure gates twinkling away in the morning light, while the PA system spilled carols into the empty air. I made my way to the departure platforms, squeezed myself between the cars of an idling train, and slipped in through the end door. There was odd, festive litter everywhere, as if a happy riot had taken place. I rummaged around and managed to turn up a styrofoam cooler filled with iced beer, chicken, and pastry. I only gave a second's thought as to what had led someone to abandon it. I sat down, hoisted a toast to good fortune, ate and drank. Life is the damnedest thing, I told myself. Even in miserable circumstance, it finds a way to serve up its perks. I even began to see my stolen shoes as a good thing in a way. You see, my mother was expecting me for Christmas dinner. She lived about 45 miles north of New York in a small blue-collar kind of town, and I didn't want to go. My brother and father had both died last year, and the thought of sitting across that lonely table sent a shiver through my bones. I didn't like the idea of showing up empty-handed either. Even in the season of giving, we reserve little glory for the giving. I called collect, told my mother I had no shoes, that there was no way I could make it. I lolled on the waiting room benches for a while, waiting, I suppose, upon a fresh act of fate to cover my feet, and I thought of my mother, who has bad eyes and bad knees and doesn't get around too well anymore. I pictured her sitting down to a lonely Christmas dinner, made lonelier still by my absence, and that drove me back to the phone. But there was no answer this time. I threaded my way back to the waiting room, past eager, wide-eyed children, past gift-laden travelers in thick winter coats, past lovers strolling hand in hand, and sat back down on the bench. The day unwound itself in loud silence. The din of the mounting crowd seemed strangely reserved, tamped down to a purr which soon lulled me into a brief doze. When I opened my eyes again, my mother was standing there. A pair of my old sneakers was in her hand. "Merry Christmas," she said.
Lee Stringer was homeless for 10 years. In 1998, he published a memoir called Grand Central Winter, Stories from the Street. He now lives in Mamaroneck, New York. In 2000 and 2001, writer Paul Auster gathered stories for a series on Weekend All Things Considered called The National Story Project. The stories came directly from listeners. This one, written by Sylvia Seymour Aiken of Memphis, Tennessee, is entitled Christmas Morning, 1949. It's read by Paul Auster.
A light drizzle was falling as my sister Jill and I ran out of the Methodist church, eager to get home and play with the presents that Santa had left for us and our baby sister, Sharon. Across the street from the church was a Pan American gas station where the Greyhound bus stopped. It was closed for Christmas, but I noticed a family standing outside the locked door, huddled under the narrow overhang in an attempt to keep dry. I wondered briefly why they were there, but then forgot about them as I raced to keep up with Jill. Once we got home, there was barely time to enjoy our presents. We had to go off to our grandparents' house for our annual Christmas dinner.
Nina, what up?
As we drove down the highway through town,
What you doing?
I noticed that the family was still there,
What's up?
standing outside the closed gas
You walking
station.
where?
My father was driving very slowly down the highway. The closer we got to the turnoff for my grandparents' house,
Oh, yeah?
the slower the car went. Suddenly, my father U-turned in the middle of the road and said,
Oh, yeah?
"I can't stand it."
How's
"What?" asked my
that
mother.
working out?
"It's those people back there at the Pan Am standing in the rain. They've got children. It's Christmas. I can't stand it." When my father pulled into
Why are
the
you
service
happy?
station, I saw that there were 5 of them,
What makes you...
parents and 3 children, 2
Why is
girls
it?
and a small boy. My father rolled down his window. "Merry
Oh, yeah?
Christmas," he said. "Howdy," the man replied. He was very tall and had to
Right.
stoop slightly to peer into the car. Jill, Sharon,
kind
and
of work
I
are you doing?
stared at the children, and they stared back at us. "You waiting on the bus?" my father asked. The man said that they were. They were going to Birmingham,
Oh, yeah?
where he had a brother and prospects of a job. "Well, that bus isn't
Oh,
going
yeah?
to come along for several hours, and you're
Yeah.
getting wet standing there. Windborne's just a couple miles up the road. They've got a shed with a cover there and some benches," my father said. "Why don't you all get in the car, and I'll run you up there."
Yeah.
The man thought for a moment, and then he beckoned to his family. They climbed into the car. They had no luggage, only the clothes they were wearing. Once they were settled
Yeah,
in,
me too.
my father looked back over his shoulder and asked the children if Santa had found them yet. The 3 glum faces mutely gave him the answer. "Well, I didn't think so," my father said, winking at my mother, "because when I saw Santa this morning, he told me he was having trouble finding y'all, and he asked me if he could leave your toys at my house. We'll just go get them before I take you to the bus stop." All at once, the 3 children's faces lit
Man,
up,
that's his head.
and they began to bounce around
Yeah,
in the
I
back
did. She
seat,
had about
laughing and
30 on.
chattering. When we got out of the car at our house, the 3 children ran through the front door and straight
Yes,
to the
you know.
toys that were spread out under our Christmas tree. One of the girls spied Jill's
That's
doll and
pretty good
immediately hugged
territory.
it to her breast. I remember that the little boy grabbed Sharon's ball, and the other girl picked up something of mine. All this happened a long time ago, but the memory of it remains
Is that like your
clear.
girlfriend?
This was the Christmas when my sisters and I learned the joy of making others happy.
Oh, yeah?
My mother
What is she, a Mexican
noticed
girl?
that the
White
middle
hair?
child was wearing a short-sleeved dress, so she gave the girl Jill's only sweater
And
to
who's the
wear.
guy that...
My father invited them to join us at our grandparents' for Christmas dinner, but
Oh,
the
yeah?
parents refused. Even when we all tried to talk them into coming, they were firm in their decision. Back in the car on the way to Windborne, my father asked the man if he had money for bus fare. His brother had sent tickets, the man said.
Oh, how much do we need
My
to get
father
you on
reached
home?
into his pocket and pulled out $2, which was all he had left
How much
until
you
his
need to
next
get you on
payday.
home?
He pressed the money into the man's hand. The man tried to give it back, but my father insisted. "It'll be late when you get to Birmingham, and these children will be hungry before then. Take it. I've been broke before, and I know what it's like when you can't feed your family." We left them there at the bus stop in Windborne. As we drove away, I watched out the window as
Oh,
long
yeah?
as I could, looking
Oh,
back
yeah.
at the little girl hugging her new doll.
Paul Auster, reading Christmas Morning 1949 by Sylvia Seymour Aiken. Auster included that piece in the National Story Project, which he curated for Weekend All Things Considered. That and other stories from the project are collected in a book called I Thought My Father Was God.
Oh, my father was an ass.
You're listening to Tinsel Tales, Stories of the Season from NPR. Even at an extraordinary time of the year, like Christmas, it can be hard for the celebration to sustain its sparkle. Still, all things considered, commentator Bailey White does her best to see that glass of eggnog as half full.
This time of year, there's an article in every women's fashion magazine about the Christmas office party. The photographs show beautiful women eating tiny food and drinking wonderful-looking clear drinks that just can't be water, and wearing black velvet and swagging silk and high-heel shoes and stockings with little glittering things on them. Every man in the pictures is as handsome as the handsomest man you ever saw, and they're all gazing longingly through horn-rimmed glasses into the eyes of the sultry-looking women whose split skirts fall open to reveal that the little glittering things go all the way up. There's a hint of mystery and intrigue, and the implication that under the spell of these wonderful clothes and the magic of midwinter, transformations will occur. Little niggling flirtations that have been going on all year will blossom, and ordinary people will be changed into the gorgeous creatures we see in the glossy pictures. I have never been to a party like that. We do have a Christmas party at the school where I teach. We have it in the teacher workroom on the last day of school after the children have gone home. The food is all left over from the classroom Christmas parties. Cupcakes with Santa Claus's face drawn on the top, little wreaths made out of Rice Krispies gummed up with melted marshmallows and dyed green with food coloring, and Hawaiian punch at room temperature. Everyone silently avoids certain things. Those gingerbread boys came from Mrs. Robinson's class. Her room mother smokes in the kitchen, and there's always an ashtray flavor lurking behind the ginger and nutmeg. We are all dressed for Christmas, certainly, but it's not the same as in the magazine. Mrs. Johnson is wearing her Santa Claus pin, the one where you pull the string and his nose lights up, and Miss Meadows is wearing a sweatshirt she painted herself. She smeared one of Santa's boots, but she turned the smear into a reindeer. I always wear my red corduroy jumper on that last day and red socks. No one tries the glittering stockings. The children will just pick all the glitter off at story time. We all sit around the paper cutter in the broken chairs that are stored in the teacher workroom and put our plates and cups where we can. The secret Santas are revealed. I had drawn Mrs. Jones's name, and I'd been secretly giving her little presents all month. I knew it was you, she says. I recognized your writing. But I disguised my writing, I wail. You disguised it that same way last year, she says. I wasn't surprised to learn that Mrs. Sampson was the one who'd given me the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer embroidered dish towel. I know her stitching. Mr. Dale, the media specialist, is the only man at our Christmas party. For the past 15 years, I've had a little crush on Mr. Dale. There's something so comforting about the way he comes into our darkened classroom when I can't get the movie projector to work. He flips open a little door on the side of the machine I didn't even know was there, reaches inside, clicks little levers, snaps things into place. Then suddenly the big reels begin to turn. We hear Dixie. There's the seal of the state of Georgia on the screen, and the movie begins. There you are, says Mr. Dale reassuringly, and then he's gone. But poor old Mr. Dale is so tired from reshelving books all day and running around with new film strip projector bulbs, and I'm a little dizzy from the effort of keeping my class under control this week when they've got more red dye than blood in their veins. After a while, Miss Meadows spills Hawaiian punch down the front of her sweatshirt, and Mrs. Johnson's Santa Claus nose won't stop blinking. Even Mr. Dale can't make it stop. Somebody pulled the string too hard, he says. Finally, we say goodbye and have a Merry Christmas to each other, gather up our things, and go home. I hang my Rudolph dish towel on the rack in the kitchen and put my feet up. Somebody pulled the elastic out of my socks at story time, and they're drooping around my ankles. I imagine Mr. Dale at home lying flat on his back with an ice pack on his head. Every time I close my eyes, I see Santa Claus's nose blinking. Next year, I tell myself, next year I'll get those glittery stockings.
Commentator Bailey White was a longtime school teacher in her hometown, Thomasville, Georgia. She's published 2 essay collections and a novel. That commentary aired on All Things Considered in 1991. While the office Christmas party always generates lots of buzz, commentator John McElraith would rather focus on one of the unspoken yet most pleasurable traditions of his holiday season.
Every decent adult